All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. So we're going to get started here today. Well, here we are. We're in Conscious Living Radio. We're all working from home, and we're doing some pre-recorded content. My name is Marc Caron. We're here at 100.5 CFRO Co-op Radio in Vancouver. And one thing as we start, I just want to give a big thank you to Co-op Radio for the work that they do. They've been 45 years running here in Vancouver as a volunteer nonprofit organization, and it really allows a lot of great great programming for music and community things going on. And right now they're just started their spring fundraiser, even though everybody's in this self-quarantine lockdown situation. But you can still donate. You can go online to coopradio.org or even consciouslivingradio.org and donate to help keep the station running and moving as we move forward to bring you new and interesting programming. With all that being said, today is a great day because I'm really happy to be here with my good friend and co-host, MC Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, Stephen Gray. And today we're speaking with Michael Stuart Ani. Now, Michael Stuart Ani has been a student of plant wisdom for almost 50 years. And as a young man, the Lakota sage, John Fire Lame Deer, guided him through his first peyote ceremony and then sent him south to Mexico in search of the steps of the ghost dance. These steps led to Michael to the Sierra Mazateca of Oaxaca. It's famous for its sacred mushroom. You can correct my pronunciation when we get going. But from the 1960s to the 70s, Michael lived in the Mazateca's most remote cloud forest and became the only outsider who was ever allowed to collect the sacred mushroom species of the region. Michael, great pleasure to be here with you today. I know there's a lot going on in your world that you want to share. And Stephen, thanks for joining us as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah. That's Oaxaca, by the way.
Oaxaca. Yeah, I get challenged sometimes with some of these names. Yeah, for sure.
And the Mazateca, right?
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've got a huge bio on your website, and you've done a lot of great work. So tell us about about yourself, your story, and what's most important to you today.
Okay. Basically, my journey started with John Fire Lame Deer about 52 years ago in Colorado. Excuse me a second. Yeah, okay.
Read that. That just happened.
Okay. Great message right now that leads up to this whole story. Anyway, I'll go back to it. And I met Lame Deer. I knew him actually when I was much younger. On the Rosebud Reservation, I had met him, and my mom was an outreach medical officer. She ran some clinics, and later on in Boulder, Colorado, he sent me on a journey. As his saying was, he said that he doesn't believe that politicians or scientists are going to, or the scientists that the politicians pay to say what they want to hear is going to solve the problems humanity has gotten us into. Only the ghost dance can do that. But he said, we, the indigenous people, back in those days they said Indian, we've lost the steps. And that night we did peyote, and I don't know what bird it was, but he took me to the edge of a cliff, and this huge bird came up. Maybe it was a blue heron, and I saw it as the peyote bird for me, and it led me south to Mexico. In Mexico is where I actually found the steps of the ghost dance in the Sierra Mazateca, where I believe the original ritual originated thousands of years ago. And from there, I was sent to the Amazon, where I spent many years first really having a good time in the Amazon. And then when the epidemics hit, I became part of the huge medical outreach effort to stop the epidemics in the Amazon.
So imagine you're going to get into this anyway, but I haven't read your book, The Ghost Dance. And so maybe I'm assuming that this and listening to this do not know much about it at all. I've been under the impression that it was a kind of messianic movement that came out of a kind of a desperation and had was associated with beliefs that don't seem to be supportable, like that people would become bulletproof and the white men would all disappear. So could you kind of correct the record on all that and say what it really
Very
is?
good point, Stephen. Yes. The ghost dance was actually the version of the ghost dance we all know is actually a guy from a smart fellow from the Smithsonian named Mooney, who actually had gotten together with Quanah Parker and was the one who convinced Quanah Parker to create the Native American Church, the Comanche prophet Quanah Parker. But what happened with the ghost dance was that he put out exactly what you said, that it was unrealistic and it was really it was a revival movement that came out of utter despair and a last chance to bring back the culture. Now, Sitting Bull, days before he died, made a comment on that because they outlawed the ghost dance, the United States government, around 1890, right at the end of the Christmas of 1889. And they immediately went to arrest Sitting Bull, who had just been returned to, by the way, the Standing Rock Reservation. And when his people spoke to him, he said, you know, I've been one of the heads of the Lakota Ghost Society for many years, and I do not believe, as Stephen says, that we're going to raise the grave and they're going to dance and that we're going to drive out all outsiders and all. He said, that's not the ghost dance. That's this revival movement. And that's what Lame Deer was talking to me about. And so when I went searching, what I realized that modern interpretation that we've been sold was actually false, that there actually was an ancient ritual, thousands of years old, possibly the very first ritual of the Americas, because in the book, the Codex Borgia, which is one of the 17 remaining Mesoamerican holy books that were not destroyed during the conquest or the American Inquisition, the New Spain Inquisition. Few books survives, and the Codex Borgia has an image of it, of the Lord Huautla, the young Lord of the Wind, who becomes the plumed serpent through a transmutation. And there he is in the book, dancing back to back in a dancing pose with the ghost of the Lord of the Dead. And this ceremony was supposed to do a series of things. One, it was the beginning of civilization, the arts, music, the healing arts introduced into another level of the Mesoamerican culture. But it was also the point where the tribes realized, or I would say the plumed serpent, Quetzalcoatl, who was dancing, realized that that there would come a time at the end of the fifth world that this time around, not like the other four before it by the elements of nature, the gods of nature, this one could possibly be destroyed by humanity ourselves. So Quetzalcoatl came up with this ritual, the ghost dance, that would go on for thousands of years, I believe in 52-year cycles right up till now. And it was, as Lame Deer said, a key to the survival of humanity's niche in the weave of nature. So in my book, the Ghost Dance, an Untold Story of the Americas, I tell the whole lineage of the story leading up exactly to what's happening today. And ironically, although the book was written years ago and just got published about a year or so ago, it tells all about what's going on in Brazil and the Amazon and the battle going on right now. It talks about the epidemics we're having now. And this was all told to me by Dishitu, because the final part of the ghost dance in the original ritual, the sacred mushroom was the theogenic sacrament of that ritual.
Really?
And that is the root of the ghost dance, which traveled to all the tribes of the Americas, not through the Bering Straits, through Mexico and corn. The oldest corn kernels ever discovered, approximately 10,000 years old, were discovered at the base of the Sierra Mazateca. And when a group of women, Mazatec women called the Comadres Limpiadas, the Clean Sisterhood, took corn all north, south, east, and west through the Americas, they took the lineage of the ghost dance, and that's why almost every tribe in the Americas has a ghost dance ceremony.
So, Michael, what I'm wondering about this, for the kind of people who are going to be watching and listening to this, is how is this relevant to, not mainstream, but like the psychedelic community and the sort of mind, body, spirit, spiritual community that are not indigenous, not native? What's the link? What's the connecting link? What's the access point to this whole principle of the ghost dance be utilized somehow?
Very good point. The ritual was set up so at this time in the history that all the individual tribes would come with their own ghost dance ritual, and there would be one ritual which in ancient times was done by a foreigner named, a conquistador named Alvaro Cabeza de Vaca, who's a historic character, who's actually the person who wove the herbal, botanical knowledge of the tribes together, because at that time the tribes were all feuding and they weren't sharing their botanical knowledge. And when Cabeza de Vaca came about 15 years or so after the beginning conquest, he got the tribes, because he was an outsider, so they didn't want to kill him or he's a spy from another tribe. He got to move through all the tribes and swap their medicinal knowledge with each other, which really finally helped the tribe stabilize after the vast epidemics the conquistadors brought to the Americas. These same epidemics and the same pattern is exactly what's gotten us involved of what's happening today with the SARS-CoV-19 virus. People are blaming governments and ethnic groups and animals, bats and snakes. That's not the root. That's just finger pointing. What's happened, why we're having the Corona-19 virus, is because nature has been disturbed. Then the animals, the wild animals there, go into trauma as the areas in trauma, and that trauma goes to the people. And that area in China, which I've been to, is a wild area right next to a city. And so when nature's in trauma like that, viruses and pathogens start to leap species. They go from one species to another, and rare because it's leaping species way faster than most other viral pathogens have. That's a curious point of it. So this insight that the Lord Quetzalcoatl had thousands of years ago very much pertains to what's going on now, because it's all about how we as humanity need to save our niche in nature to survive our strand in the weave. And what's coming at us is obvious at this point. People say, oh, the apocalypse and the destruction is on its way. No, we're in the middle of it. We have epidemics, we have fires, we have floods. Things are going on already. We're just like that toad in the water heating up, not aware that it's heating around us. So it very much pertains to what's going on today.
So, and Michael, if I may ask, what do you see happening, like in regards to COVID down with the indigenous people down in South America? How is this affecting them? What's going on there, like in today's world, real time for them?
And I've got a very interesting story for that. When the COVID hit the Western world, we were obviously completely unprepared, unbelievably unprepared. And so what did people do, and what did the epidemiologists lead us to do? What we call social separation. And what the social distancing, and what that word is kind of like a permaculture, a Western word put on a group of indigenous techniques and rituals put together and given a nice sounding Western name, which is fine, but that's what it is. And in the case of this, what's happened is that the tribes in South America who have Wyoming, and Wyoming is social distancing. When they get sick, they leave the village, they march out into the jungle. The Yanomami call it Wyoming. They sing the song Boninatema when they do it. And they spread out in the jungle until the pathogen dies down. They burn the village and they start over again. And this is the most epidemics. And this is the only technique we had on the front line. We use only this ancient indigenous technique from them. Now COVID has gone to them. So we're kind of in a metaphoric way in the future from them. They're just finding out it's coming, and we know what it does. So people are talking about all these Western medicine things. We must send this medicine, we must send that. But the fact of the matter is, if they could get the message before the virus comes to go on Wyoming and separate into the vast forest, that would be the best possible technique for them to survive. And it's a consciousness thing that we're dealing with now in the modern world. Is we tend to see these indigenous people as in peril, and they have no skills, and they need us as mommy and daddy to kind of save them. They are very articulate about saving themselves. They have lasted with their culture intact through the rubber boom, the conquest, modernization, Bolson, Reagan, Bush, Trump, all kinds of things. So let's give these people credit for their skills and the skill they gave us. So that's the circle. The very thing that's helped us came from them. In a way, now we got to make them aware so they can use it.
So here's the one thing that I find interesting. If these indigenous people are, in the jungle, living their life untouched by us, they have the physical distancing. How does COVID get to them if what they're telling us in the news of how it transmits and spreads and everything else? It doesn't make sense to me that if they're already quarantined in their own life, which is not quarantine, but I use that so people can metaphorically understand, how does COVID get in there if we're not getting in there? And just on a side note, I want to say to anybody who's watching, linguistics, let's not be social distant. Let's be close socially. Let's just be physically distant and give everybody the space that they need and respectful of that. But the play on words of being social, let's not be distant socially. Let's be closer than we've ever been before. I just felt I had to say that, Michael.
I like that very much. And it's a great question, Mark. What's going on is all these diseases come into the jungle in two ways. Evangelists, U.S. missionary groups, and the gold miners and lumber people that Bolsonaro has opened up the Amazon to on purpose to infect the tribes. The fires that happened in the Amazon last year were not natural. They were purposely set by an organization run by Bolsonaro's right-hand man, Antonio Luis Naban Garcia, who was head group, was directly linked to the Nazi dictatorship in the 60s. And all of a sudden, after Bolsonaro was elected, he's disappeared, and he set the fires. There were reports that his same group set the fires with help from the fellows of their movement in Bolivia. And so these fires destroyed so much, but people didn't realize under those fires, the people got very sick, which is the long-term plan to get rid of indigenous people with epidemics, which we are now first understanding, because many people say, this has never happened No, this has never happened to Western people. It happens to indigenous people all the time because we bring it to them. So it's the gold miners and the missionaries that are doing this, and the evangelist missionaries are organized under a group called the New Tribes Mission that has changed their name to Ethnos 360 after they were convicted of many charges of pedophilia and genocide and destruction of tribal culture, and were thrown out of Venezuela in the right after 9/11, and there's an actual movement. So that's how these diseases. The Yanomami boy who was infected by either a missionary or a gold miner.
So that's the initiative you're currently promoting right now, right? Is to stop these people. Can you go into detail about that?
Yes, and I just got word seconds ago, that's why I looked away, of something unbelievably amazing going on that, and Stephen Corey, the head of Survival International, have been hitting on as hard as we can, which is the New Tribes Mission was the group that I was very much involved with, having thrown out of Venezuela after we realized what they do is they create epidemics, because the tribes, true traditional tribal people, will never buy into another belief like that. They never go along with the missionaries until the missionaries start an epidemic. And when they're so sick, when we're sick, you can't even think straight. You just want to survive. When the indigenous people are in such bad shape, they have no hope. The missionaries come in with a magic chloroquine pill, of course, one of our local favorites lately, and give it to them. And for about a week or two, they feel better, and they really believe this great magic has been given to them. And then they die within the month.
What's this pill? What's this pill you speak of?
What Trump has been saying is going to work for COVID-19. It's called chloroquine. It was the standard anti-malarial for the world for very many years, until among the Yanomami, we discovered that the plant, Artemisia annua, a wormwood commonly known in the United States as Sweet Annie, had an 87% success rate with malaria, while the millions of dollars we had donated in medicine, the chloroquine, had a 12 to 14% success rate. So when you're dealing with a major infection rate way above that, you can't fight an epidemic with something that's 12 to 14% success. And what happened was, at that point, we really used this plant, which not only worked against malaria, it worked against psoriasis, yellow fever. I can go on and on of all the different diseases. It was very powerful with. And then Bill Gates got in the middle of it and cut a deal with big pharmaceutical to synthesize Artemisia, marry it to chloroquine, which the commercial name was Lariam, and make a pill out of that, so there would be still billions of dollars made in the pharmaceutical industry. The problem was synthetic medicines, pharmaceuticals, although in many cases can be great. I'm not a Luddite with this, it goes two ways. But the problem with them is the bioengineers inside pathogens can figure out the structure of a synthetic very quickly because it's very standardized. In nature, plants vary which side the sun hit them, which way the water ran, what's next to them. So it's very hard for the biochemist inside the pathogen to figure it out. So we tried to convince Gates that he was making a giant mistake, but he did not listen.
Mm-hmm. So, excuse me, we need to hear more about what this Ethno 360 group is doing, but as a background, because I'm sure most people, like until you mentioned it to me on the phone a week or two ago, I'd never heard of these people. So I think the public here, or our public as it were, needs to hear a little bit about who these people are, and then maybe you could go into a bit more of what they're doing, if Marc will allow us before his mid-session break here.
We're past the mid-session break, and that's why I was going to say, and before we do that, I just want to say for those of you listening on air live on Wednesday or whenever they're going to play this, because they could play it at any time, you're listening to Conscious Living, our episode of what I call Conscious Conversations with Stephen Gray and Michael Stuart Ani. You're listening on 100.5 CFRO FM right here in Vancouver. It's our 45-year anniversary. We run on donations. It's a nonprofit volunteer group that brings the programming there, so please feel free to donate so we can keep our program going. ConsciousLivingRadio.org. You can make your donation there. And great question, Stephen.
Great. And I'm going to start by answering with say, in this very moment on this show with my friends here, something historic just happened moments ago.
Are you saying we have groundbreaking news on Conscious Living Radio?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Yes. It's very good groundbreaking news for a change, which is the president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, who has publicly said he wants to destroy and get rid of the indigenous people. He raises no question where he stands. Why the pandemic was going on, he used it as a screen and gave permission to an ex-member of the New Tribes Mission who still represents the New Tribes Mission. The New Tribes Mission was the original name of Ethnos 360 before the convictions, and they changed their name. None of us have heard of them yet. They are the largest evangelist outreach organization in the world. They have been involved with bringing mass epidemics to more indigenous people than any group on earth, yet none of us have heard of them pretty much. I've known of them since the 1965 New York World's Fair, where they were part of a pavilion with the White Cliff Bible translators named after their prophecy of 2,000 tribes. They believe that it is their job to convert every tribe on earth to their gospel, and when the last 2,000 of those tribes are converted, they will bring on their prophecy of 2,000 tribes and their version of the end of days. And this is their basis belief, and not just theirs. Every evangelist believes that we are entering the end of days. I don't want to say every, but the movement itself very much stands behind we are entering the end of days. So we have many leaders who are in charge of our destiny who believe we all have to die so they, the chosen few, could rise up and go to heaven. You don't want this person in charge of your boat going through the rapids. No, that's what I'm saying, people. You want someone who goes, hey, we're going to make it through this, and I've got a plan, not you have to die, so I have to be alive. And I think these people should be questioned publicly, including Mike Pence, who's a member of these organizations, along with Jerry Falwell Jr. and Pat Robertson, and that whole gang is together. This is a hidden world that's been purposely hidden from us. And the New Tribes Mission, Ethnos 360, is very good at hiding. And here's the groundbreaking news. They had given Ethnos 360 a brand new high-tech helicopter purposely to go into the last 2 regions on the entire earth where there are groups of truly uncontacted people. And they're both in the Amazon. Africa has not had people like this in hundreds of years, nor is New Guinea ended with the cargo cults at World War II. It's in the Amazon. And the 2 main areas are the Javari Valley, which is on the border with Peru, and the Siapa River Basin, Alto Orinoco, which is where I spent many years. And that's why I had the great privilege to be with uncontacted. And so he has set up a group of new tribes missionaries to go into all these regions immediately and try to evangelize them in the time of a pandemic with people who notoriously succumb very rapidly to respiratory diseases. I mean, it's horrendous. Well, myself and through our network, Stephen Corey and myself both found out about this. And we have been, he with, of course, Survival International in a big way, we've been bombarding the network. I spoke to both Stephen and you, Marc, about this. And here's the incredible news. They were stopped this morning. They are not going to be allowed to go into the regions. When we get done here, I never drink in the day, but I'm having a shot of mezcal when this is over. Because for me, this is a moment in my life. This is incredible for me that this is happening.
Well, great work on that, Michael. And I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing there, because I think it's really important. And especially at this time, it's so counterintuitive when they're talking about all this physical distancing that they want to go in and do exactly what you're talking about. And the fact that you got that stopped in the work that you guys are doing, thank you for that. It's really great news.
And I just want to add a little to that. The news just came out. My wife just came in the room and opened the door, and I was like, I'm in the middle of a show. She said, you got to see this. So one of the reasons we were getting together today was to organize people to make this happen. And now what I'm saying that now we've gotten this amazing thing that's happened. It's no time to let up, because what we're facing today, to me, everything harsh in my life has great lessons. And I think a lot of people like myself, I've actually learned more from the harsh stuff from that's happening to me. And what we're dealing with is what this is telling us, the COVID-19, or telling me. I've been through 3 major epidemics, and I believe I've looked the beast of epidemic in the eyes. And this is not that. We will get this under control in one way or another. The lessons we've learned from this are 2 big lessons. First lesson is epidemiology 101. The first moment you catch wind of any problems in an animal group, in a human group, or in the plant world in your garden, the minute you find those first insects that have infected a plant, you must find them and not wait 3 days. An hour later, clean that mess up, or they will infect your whole garden. They will infect our whole population, and we will be dealing with them every day. If you're smart and you jump on it, and that's the rule to epidemiology, get it in the beginning. Before you have COVID or the flu or a cold and you feel that tickle in your throat, use ginger and salt or something to get rid of that tickle, and it'll never get in your system. We got to get these things quick. That's what Larry Brilliant, who's a master in this, talks about. We got to jump on them right away and get them. And that's exactly what we didn't do. We allowed it to go crazy before we woke up. And so we're dealing with it every day instead of maintenance every 2 weeks is where we should be at. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is, this virus, this pandemic is a vanguard pandemic. It's the first one coming through in this series. We have a storm of pandemics, and the destruction that's going on in the Amazon, I tell you firsthand, without a question, I have seen hemorrhagic fevers, what we call bush fever, and I have seen many viral and other pathogens ready to burst out of the forest. And it's a little bit of a confusion because the environmental movement usually liked really, so they got on this lungs of the earth thing. And I don't want to ruin anybody's thing, but the Amazon is not the lungs of the earth. If the earth is alive, which I believe it is, its breathing system is a skin. Every tree in Canada helps the earth breathe the same as a tree in the Amazon. There's no difference from it. But what specifically the Amazon and other regions like that are rainforests, they're the only place on earth where viruses and life forms are created every day. And that's the magic of the rainforest. So if you cut down the trees that were created by the bats and the bees and the birds our natural aids in nature, our friends that keep us alive, not our enemies, they keep these diseases at bay. And we discovered the minute they cut down the forest to make the Kinshasa Highway through Africa, that's exactly when HIV and Slim's disease, AIDS, and Marburg's and Ebola and Lassa got on that highway, got to planes, and went around the world. Here we are fighting this huge epidemic, and we have this maniac racist in South America cutting down the forest, ready to release 20 pandemics, far worse than the one we're in. So now that we've stopped the New Tribes mission for a moment, we got to stop this going. This is the awakening of this time. This is what we all talk about, the plant knowledge that it's giving us. We got to wake up and realize life wasn't normal at all. We go return to normalcy. That's no normalcy of that I know anything about. We got to really start living with the planet. And as one of my greatest heroes, because she really can interspecies communicate, the absolutely wonderful Jane Goodall said, and when Jane says something, she has a quiet voice, but listen to that lady. Got a small window, and I believe Jane.
So how confident are you, or what does your intuition tell you about how likely it is that there will be enough of a consciousness transformation caused by this particular pandemic to shift things enough so that it won't, harder and harder?
What a loaded question, Stephen. I want to throw that back at you two guys. I don't have, I have much more faith in nature and the plant kingdom that really rules this planet. We've turned them into background scenery and hedges, but they're not. They control the weather, and weather is the Achilles heel of civilization, because you cannot have a sedimentary society that stays still and without weather, not only rain and sun, but in the correct progression to produce crops to feed people and maintain that civilization. Like you guys to say something about that, because I don't have that great much faith in humankind that we're going to wake up until we really get hit in the face. And I think Caron is a slap, but we all know that slap can wear off. Everyone's like, let's run right back to destroying the planet at a quicker rate to get back the money we lost. Ooh, bad idea. And in my life, I've learned usually when something comes at me heavy, it's kind of baseball. It's 3 strikes. Something catches my attention and I don't pay attention. That same thing goes, no, you need to pay attention. And for whatever my foolish reasons are, I don't. And the third time it hits me in the head. I think that's where we're at. We're going to get a strike or two before it really comes, but something very big, even bigger than this, because I think that's what you're bringing up, Stephen. Was this big enough to really change the course of action to where people like us know we have to go, being plant medicine in so much of our lives? I think it's going to have to be something stronger, but I will say this in my book, sacred mushroom called Dishtu, which is the one that the tribes only took in their rituals before the Western world came in and got into the psilocybin mushrooms and the magic mushroom. And I've had a 52-year history with ceremonies with the tribes with this plant. And this plant, as Dennis McKenna is bringing to worlds, it's such a fascinating word. There's absolute communication that's established. The beauty of these plants is they have figured out a way to communicate with us, which is incredible. And DC2 has said to me, and when I first came to the States, back to the States many years ago, and I spoke at the World Bank and Inter-American Bank, I spoke a lot of places. And I'd leave and I'd be like, God, I was an interesting monkey to them, I was curious. Nobody did anything. Al Gore screamed for years. Nobody did anything. think now we're at a point where we're seeing that the indigenous people's voice is the voice that can really get us aware. And of course, why that's happening, there's another side to the story that wants to take away their oil pipelines and destroy them culturally. And I think this isn't an accident. I think there is actually a struggle going on in the world today. I will use the word a metaphysical struggle, not between good and evil, but as people say to me sometimes, do you believe in God? And I said, that all depends which God you're talking about. There's many deities in many different ways. Said, burn all these people alive and do all these things. You know, so there's different voices speaking, whatever name you want to put on those voices, speaking to different people. And to end the question, no, I think we're in a very tricky time. But Dishitu told me, don't be the Duke of Doom, that so many amazing things are going to come out in this period of time right now that it's going to just change the whole way people think of things. As one of my favorite statements lately was from Trump, excuse me, when he went, gosh, how would anybody have known this was coming? Well, everyone at the Plant Spirit Conference knew it was coming. Every indigenous person on earth knew it was coming. You didn't know because you know nothing about nature.
Well, I happen to believe he knew it was coming, and there was, you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, and that's why I find it interesting that you mentioned something in regards to, you know, the pandemic not as bad as what they say, and there's some of these belief systems out there that's creating a divide. And when you talk about not being, and I love this, the Duke of Doom, it's fantastic. I even shared a post today, and a friend came back to me and I was like, I'm just saying, I didn't say anything wrong except free choice and freedom, and we need to have the choice to make our own choice, our own decisions, and respect it without getting angry, hurtful, and mean to people because we might have different beliefs on what's happening in the state of the world today. And I think, you know, what you're sharing and your experience just down in South America and in the jungles is very, very profound. And I happen myself to believe what I hear from you being there more so than I'm going to hear from mainstream media or what might be out there. So I thank you really for sharing that and at least opening up that, you know, the opportunity for people to consider the possibility that as bad as we think this might be, and as you say, it might not be bad enough. And if there's one thing I want to ask people is take a look at nature right now. You know, the air is cleaner here. We're seeing more stars. It's fresh. It's crisp. People are slowing down. There's a lot of gifts to be had if we just stop and take a moment to look around us and appreciate what we have. But, you know, nature out here in my neck of the world just seems to be cleaner, fresher, more alive.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, there's a, this is not the place and time for a debate about the virility or the virulence of this particular virus and, you know, and who's trying to manipulate information and all that stuff. But I just with that for people listening that I think one of the things that Michael has implied, if not stated directly, is that you cannot take a casual attitude about this and assume that it's overblown and all that, because what you said earlier on, Michael, I think was quite apropos, which is that you have to, just like you have to catch that, you know, infecting bug in your garden, you have to catch it immediately. But to say that, and also I suspect we're coming near the end of this. So Marc, Michael was talking about
we have 6 minutes left.
Yeah, so Michael was talking about, you know, we're talking about things that can be done and like how important the plants are and changing our relationship with them and so on. And so perhaps this would be a good moment for you to say something about what the Canadian Psychedelic Association is doing with this petition for our Canadian listeners and viewers.
Yeah, two sides. One side is Exactly. You said it so well, Stephen. We are really at that point where we need to wake up and jump on things right now. We've let them go very far. And Jane Goodall says we still got a window. Dishi too says we still got a window. I'm believing them here. And and that's where the ghost dance and the less practical comes in. The indigenous people are really on the front line. And what's happening in the Amazon now, we've had this great victory today with this, but this is just a piece because there's two working things. The destruction is going on greater than ever, releasing these pathogens greater than ever, and we must get a grip on that. And that's, what we are. And how this relates to the plants and the ghost dance is, I very much learned in the jungle. I saw that there's just something about those people that they have this awareness of that world in a way we can't even imagine. And I heard Dennis speak about it, and it reminded me of what I heard over and over in the jungle. I would become, after 2 years of being lied to, I'd finally become friends with a great Shapuri, a medicine person. And I'd say to them, how did you, Baichi, figure out, or your great-grandfather figure out how to mix the incredible concoction of ayahuasca? And it happened over and over. They look at me peculiar because now they knew me, and they drop their guard and they go, the plants told us, you know that. And over the years, as Dennis was talking about in a scientific, more chemical way, but that's his world, and beautiful how he did that. But it was exactly my feelings. These plants really have ways to communicate with you. In fact, they have a language even, as Dennis was talking about. They have a song, which they absolutely do. Anyone who truly knows them knows. Each one has a very particular song. And if I experienced it 5 years later than each of you guys, and we got together and I hummed that song, you laugh because you go, that's interesting about it.
Oh, that's
and the point that this is coming from the plant kingdom, we have to learn again how to communicate with the elements of nature. That is our big fault. We've completely lost. These plants used properly, and properly is a big statement here, can truly teach you how to communicate again with the elements of nature. And to me, that is the most important thing humanity has to learn right now.
Beautifully.
Beautiful, yeah. And as Dennis would say, symbiosis, baby.
That's Dennis.
Yeah. So Marc, you want to just briefly say something about what the Canadian Psychedelic Association is doing to try to, to promote what Michael's just talking about, is the way, access to these plants?
Well, it's decriminalizednature.ca. Is one of their initiatives, as well as just bringing together the psychedelic community to really support the work that's going on. And the big part of the decriminalized nature is around the plant medicines, the sacred mushroom, the ayahuasca, San Pedro, all of these medicines. So it's really a group of people in an association that are looking to honor, protect, preserve the medicines, to educate, provide experience and healing. So it's just a really great movement that's just started because of the move that's happening, and we just want to get ahead of the curve so that we have a place where people can go get great information and support and really be able to check people out when it comes time to start doing their own psychedelic therapies and things.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention the petition at decriminalizednature.ca, correct? Because
I'm going to share it in the comments right down below here too.
Yeah, good. Because as they've said, if they get 500 signatures, and they're almost there now, the Canadian Parliament is legally required to read it out in Parliament. But Trevor Miller, who is one of the people behind this, is aiming for 500,000 signatures, and then they will really be forced to pay attention to it.
Well, when we did the the one here in Vancouver is back in, I think it was September, was it September 11th anyways, or that last fall, and we needed a certain number of, like it just blew it out of the water. There's so much response to it that, you know, and the whole, what they were passing, I'm not quite clear exactly, can't quite recall, but it was all shut down. So, yeah. But what I'd like to do, guys, I want to wrap up the show here on Conscious Living Radio at CFRO 100.5 in Vancouver, but we're happy to stick around a little bit longer if anybody's got a bit of time and wrap it up, and maybe some closing comments or questions and statements. You can watch anything left if you're listening on the air. You can just visit consciouslivingradio.org or visit the Facebook page and see the rest of the interview as well. A couple of great events coming up. Stephen Gray's doing his online cannabis ceremony. It was quite a success last week. We're doing it again May 25th. I'll put some links down below. Oh, sorry, April 25th, sorry. I'll put some links down below. And we're working with Caron Urquhart. Stephen, maybe say a quick word about that.
Well, yeah, it deserves a much longer monologue, but the brief version of it is that Caron is the priest, Reverend Caron Urquhart.
30 seconds.
Yeah, okay, at St. Christopher's Anglican Church on the North Shore here in Vancouver. And she is one of a small group of radical visionary activists who are doing something really important, which is get the medicines back into the churches, you know, so that these churches can have real power. And so we're going to do this in association with them so that she can reach out to her community as well to get them to come and participate in our online ceremony this Saturday.
And stay tuned. We're going to do a chat with Stephen and Caron about that as well. Moving forward, you have been listening to Conscious Living Radio on Co-op Radio 100.5 FM in Vancouver. I'd like to thank our guests, Michael Stuart Ani and Stephen Gray, for joining me. Thanks again, gentlemen, and we'll see you next time. And we are also still live, guys, so if we want to carry on any more conversation, we can do that. And yeah, that was a great conversation. Thank you so much for that great insight, Michael, of what's going on down there in South America, and just, you know, more about the ghost dance and things, and learning about your work. It's been really quite fascinating. So thank you for that opportunity.
Oh yeah, you've expressed it so clearly. Got the point across about the relate. I loved what you were talking about just near the end there, or the last bit about how the plants actually have so much to communicate, and we can learn how to act, you know, to open ourselves to that kind of communication. I never really heard this. I vaguely heard this idea that you know, plants have a song, but I've never heard that there was like a specific song, and that other people, you know, that a number of people would hear it and be able to relate it to others who would say, "Oh yeah, that's fascinating." Yeah.
In fact, it was really key to me getting the two things that got me across the bridge to where I really could travel through fairly dangerous tribes that usually killed outsiders. And it was, I learned very early that if their ancestors don't accept you, they will never accept you and be forthcoming. I had to learn the ancestor ceremonies, which many of them involve the theogens. And this was really a big point of my understanding there, to know the ancestors, and then in the ceremonies take part in these particular songs. Because one time in the jungle, two indigenous guys came up to where I was, and we were having some linguistics problems with their idioma, with their language. And I just jokingly started imitating the song, and they were like, "How do you know that?" You know, this is stuff this whole thing about a shaman teacher teaching people, that was basically invented by Carlos Castaneda. You've got to get it directly from nature or directly from that spirit. And then the elders will keep you on the path, but they won't get in the middle of it. This thing that you go to school, you go to shaman school to become a shaman, is really counterintuitive to these people. And that leads me to the point of a tricky thing, which is there's two things going on at once. Using psychedelics to help the problems of civilization our fears of death, neurosis, psychological problems. It's quite obvious what's gone on with Johns Hopkins and other places with you folks are coming out of that. But it's not the same as communicating with plants. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different thing. And in that world, you can't take it over and over like a medicine. That will ultimately, people who do that with ayahuasca usually end up in a very tricky place. These things, when I learn those plants, you have to learn everything about it, and then you take the plant and it brings all that information together. I noticed in the jungle that the medicine people who had no contact with any outsiders, they only did their plant ceremonies when it was a very specific reason to do it, and never did it in between. As those tribes got closer to the missions and closer to the anthropologists, they started taking the ayahuasca and the yopo and the beni more and more and more, as if they were feeling they were losing their contact, and they were trying to drug themselves back into that state. So there's been a little confusion in the movement that there's actually two movements that are very valid, but they're not the same thing.
Fascinating. So that brings me, I mean, for me, that's a really interesting point about, like not doing these so much, because, so I'm wondering, I don't know if you know much about what the Santo Daime and these other Brazilian syncretic churches are doing, but they're typically will be drinking ayahuasca in ceremony once a month or even more frequently. And this would go on if you're a lifetime member, for decades even, So are you suggesting, I know you don't want to be hard on anybody in particular, for, working with medicines, but are you suggesting this is possibly not the best way to go about, being with these medicines, to do them that frequently in that kind of context?
And as a side note, before you answer that, Michael, it kind of goes into what Jamie Will was talking about the hedonistic calendar and things. He was talking about the overuse of these medicines as well. So that was a really great question. Thank you.
That's a different demographic, though. We're talking, what Jamie said was, 10% should never touch these things. 80%, maybe 5 times in their lives for really important rituals. And then the other 10% at the other end are the psychonauts that are exploring these and really learning from them. But still asking that question to Michael about even that group, the 10%ers or whatever you want to call them. Do you think there's some potential, problems or sidetracks with that kind of frequent use, even in a ritual context?
I think these things are so powerful. These, the wild ones, I will say, are so incredible and so wild that any wild animal, no matter how beautiful or friendly it walks up to you, has an incredible danger to it. So when it comes up against a domestic animal, which is us. So yes, I think there's a great dangers involved with this. I think this is going to have a dangerous side to it. But I have known the work people are doing with people with cancer or with different psychological problems of society, where more than one usinol seems to be the protocol. I don't do that, and I'm not an expert in that, so I really can't comment, but I've seen it work. I do know this: when you're searching for that spirit world, when you're on the medicine path, what the tribes call the blue path and all that, they will not let you do that. The only curious thing is, when I first started, what happened was I was with 2 other young indigenous guys who grew up in those communities, and verse of them. With them, they had to study for almost 8 years before they ever touched any of these plants. With me coming from the outside world, they did it with me a few times right away, kind of to shake my whole world loose. Then I got on the other pattern. So these things are very tricky, and we're just really coming out what we know about them. But if we're talking about communicating with the elements of nature, getting aware of how to stop pandemics, getting aware of how to make the rain, not make the rain, excuse me, to be with the rain so it feels and comes at the right times and all this. That's the path I'm talking about. And the other way will never get you to that place, as maybe what happens in the tribe. You know, my dear friend Francis Huxley, who was one of the pioneers of all this, whose house I'm sitting in right now, he said that, you know, in his old age, he liked the chemical psychedelics better because the others were too rough on his system. And he was one of the wisest people I ever met in my life. So, and you know, he's the one who took mescaline with all this in that famous first experience, and very aware of this. But he was also the founder of Survival International, Francis. He also very much agreed with me, and he spent many years in the Amazon like me, that if you're on the path to commune with nature, to truly learn these plants, you have to follow the pattern of this and not say, well, we're Western, the super race, we're the greatest people on earth, and so we can make it all up ourselves and wing it, and hey, let's play some Kenny Loggins, that's good. The spirits don't hear Kenny Loggins, I'll tell you.
Oh, no. Well, that seems like, you know,
he's good, but they don't hear him.
But what you're laying out there as a vision from, you know, where we are in the sort of, you know, modern dominator cultures, even amongst the psychedelic community to a large degree, you know, I mean, how do we just bridge that gap from A to B in a sense, you know, where people actually start to understand, you know, this kind of ability to communicate with nature through the use of these plants?
That was the thing you and I got into, Stephen, when we were discussing how we can bring the most informative people to the conference in Vancouver. And I said, you know, Stephen, the people I know who really know this stuff, they don't have passports. They're afraid of outside people. They're running around naked in the bushes. They've never been on an airplane. Probably if you got them in front of 3 white people, they'd clam up like a clam and not say anything. So no, getting them, as we talked about, is very difficult. What has happened, you know, this is where we got to clear up our culture a little bit. What has happened is certain groups and people have run off to the jungle and they go, we have found the great shaman. I was there for 3 days and it just happened this shaman speaks Spanish or Portuguese and English, and I'm the amazing person who found them, and here they are because they're indigenous person. We believe that just because of that, they know this great truth. I, who have lived, know even now in the epidemics, how the tribes in the jungle that are remote, that still know about Wyoming, that can still hear the spirit breeze in the wind, are not the same people on the fringe of the jungle that are also intact indigenous tribes, but they've been westernized. And if you listen to them talking and asking for help, they're asking for Western medicine. The tribes in the bush are not asking for that. So even in their culture, when States, when they signed most of the treaties, probably in Canada too, most of those people who signed treaties were people that the military said were chiefs, not what the people said were medicine men and chiefs. And we're in that same situation where, as I was speaking actually with Jamie and Wade about this, that, you know, Wade's a little younger than me, but me and Wade were the last of the generation of the old-time anthropologists, explorers, and all that. And I can speak for Wade easier than myself. The man is truly the true prototype of a poet anthropologist. He's an incredible human being. And the way he speaks, sometimes, you know, I don't know if other people hear in him what I hear, but it's just poetry like water going through my head. You know, it's just amazing. And we have been, I know people go, no, we want someone like this. But if you want, like I used to say to people, they go to me 30 years ago, people would come to me and go, bring ayahuasca. And I'd say to them, if you want to do that with me, we need to go to the jungle. You need to feel the different kinds of mud. You need to feel the different insects. You need to know the plants that grow with ayahuasca, or ayahuasca will take you on a carnival ride but it will not let you hear its voice.
Wow.
That's something different. So I believe people like me and Wade who put in 50 years, Wade's been around a long time, right? We are that bridge, and we understand we're not the one. We're the bridge.
Yeah.
And I think that's
really, yeah, and that's essential. And that's what I was going to say anyway, if you didn't say it, was that, you know, we're having you back at our conference for the second year for that very reason, because we, you know, like you're willing to dance naked in front of 600 people.
I love that. I ain't willing. That's what they call spirit possession, Steve.
We have Rec Beach for that too.
Yeah. And Marc, we have don't we have a meeting with Andrew in 45 minutes?
Yeah, we do. But I wanted to thank you, Michael, just for what you said there about the, you know, some of the challenges of getting the Indigenous people, because I know Stephen knows that firsthand because he works with this, you know, for our speakers and our presenters. And it is one of our most common comments of room for improvement is that. And I'm glad that you clarified that based on your experience, because I know for Stephen, it's not as easy as some might think.
Super hard.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. It's really good for our community to hear that from someone such as yourself who actually knows.
May I go eat lunch now, Marc?
You may, Stephen. You are released. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, it's Conscious Living Radio here, doing the online pre-records for Co-op Radio. And just happy that you joined us. I dropped a bunch of links down below in the Facebook thread. Got links to Stephen's cannabis ceremony. Got links to Michael Stuart Ani's websites. There's some videos there and some trailers of a documentary he did as well. And you can take a look at his book and follow up online with anything more you want to know about Michael Stuart Ani. And Stephen Gray, well, he's out there too. All the information is out there. So by all means, we look forward to seeing you again next time that we go live and do another spontaneous episode of Conscious Living Radio. So thank you so much, guys. Always a pleasure. We'll see you again.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, guys. You know I love you.
Love you too, man.
Thanks for putting it together, Marc.
My pleasure. It's what I do.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See you in 45 minutes.
Yes, sir. I'm going for lunch too.
Right.